Welcome to this first edition of Nudges and Bridges. For the next year or more, and every month or more frequent, I'm going to be providing a 5 to 10 minute or so reflection on the ways in which what I call cultural artifacts might help us cross bridges with each other, build bridges with each other, and find common ground with those that we might otherwise disagree, and to make better decisions in order to lead us there. My name is Tim Fort from Indiana University, the Kelley School of Business, and I look forward to being with you over the next month, year, more than a month. We'll see how it all goes. So what I'd like to do is to take a look at the ways in which in our society today, and frankly around the world, we find a great deal of difficulty in order to be able to communicate with each other. We always seem to be at odds. It always seems to be an us versus them kind of mentality. And I think that our future really depends on our capability of being able to communicate with each other, to find common ground with each other. And what I'm going to be suggesting to you or offering to you over the next year or so could be described as baby steps. I don't apologize for that, but looking around, I think that we need to take some sort of steps. And whether they're baby steps or some other kind of steps, we got to do something. This isn't a magic bullet. This is one of many things that people might be able to do. But I want to offer this notion of cultural artifacts as the way that we might be able to find common ground with each other. Now, what do I mean by a cultural artifact? Well, if you talk to an anthropologist, I think they could say just about anything that produced by culture is a cultural artifact. So it can be a very, very broad term. And I'm going to be using a little bit more narrowly, but also narrowly with the invitation of expanding it. So when I'm thinking of cultural artifacts, I'm talking about music, sports, business, literature, film, cuisine, even our dogs and cats, of ways that of things that are produced by culture that might be something that we can connect with each other. By the way, I know that a dog or a cat is not just produced by culture, they're biological creatures, but making them into pets and the breeds that we create and making them into the pets do make them a bit of a cultural artifact. So I indicated that these are supposed to be 5 to 10 minute reflections. So I'm not supposed to be talking long. I realize that attention spans are short these days and you're really busy and you've got a lot of other things to do. And so maybe I ought to take my advice or live up to my promises and get to it. What I'd like to do today is to share two stories, two vignettes of these cultural artifacts. And that will be the general way that I approach this. So I will share a couple of stories each episode that I think provides a nice illustration of the way that these cultural artifacts might unite us. The first one comes from Rwanda. Now, I realize that these days we have a lot of disagreement and a lot of vindictive and vitriol. But take a look at Rwanda more than 25 years ago as it was coming out of a genocide where over 1 million people were killed. There are some really serious differences with fatal consequences. And how does one come out of that? How does one engage in society in the midst or in the aftermath of something like that happen? Well, there were some women in Rwanda who had an idea. I think it was a pretty good idea. They said, let's form a drumming troupe. Music. Let's form a drumming troupe where women from both sides of that catastrophe would come together and practice and play and perform. And apparently, this was the first time that women, if this is the right word for it, women were allowed to play drums in Rwanda. And the women found that they loved it. They loved the music. They loved coming together. They loved the opportunity to work with each other. They didn't forget what happened. They knew what had happened, but they wanted to find a new narrative, a new story that would allow them to find common ground and work together toward the future. And one of the things that they found was that they had so much fun with each other. They enjoyed working with each other so much that they ended up forming an ice cream business in Rwanda. That's kind of a nice idea, right? And so they formed an ice cream business, another kind of a cultural artifact of business that, like music and in a different way, allows people to find common ground to work together. Now, this isn't to paint a purely rosy picture. There are still in business, not everybody in the group could be hired. There were disagreements that occurred throughout the running the business. And so I'm not saying that this is now Pollyanna, the just wonderful panacea of peace and harmony. There are still things to work through, but it also provided a common ground and a set of relationships and a kind of community so that people were able to dialogue with each other and work through those kinds of issues. So you've got music, you've got business. And how did I find out about this? Well, actually, I was putting together a film series on peace-related issues for the Indiana University Cinema. And I was looking for films that would, portray possibilities. And I came across this documentary, Sweet Dreams, which I highly recommend. And I show it to my students and they absolutely love it because it just opens their eyes to the possibilities. They see, and my students, frankly, are pretty frustrated with the amount of bickering that goes on, the us versus them, the no communication, the no problem solving. And they see what happened in Rwanda and say, my goodness, if they could do that in Rwanda, why can't we do it here? And so I really highly recommend the film. And so, but in this instance for our presentation today, film introduced what music and business can do in post-genocide Rwanda. Let me give a second example. Second example, also that I learned through film, although you can learn it through other sources certainly as well, is the famous World War I Christmas Eve truce, where in the trenches in World War I, French, German, and Scottish soldiers came literally out of their trenches onto the killing fields, where days before people were being shot and killed in the World War I trenches. And they celebrated Christmas. They sang together. They played soccer together. They traded business. They traded with each other, cigarettes for whiskey and stuff like that. They celebrated a religious service together. They even found that they co-owned a cat who apparently went back and forth between the lines, and each side thought that the cat was theirs. And they each had a different name for the cat, but there's a pet as well. Now, if you can come out of the trenches during World War I and find ways to find common ground with each other, and the people who hours before you were killing, there's a real possibility for these cultural artifacts. They help us lead to the conversation. I am not, by the way, wanting to minimize. I realize that there's a counter argument of a problem with fraternization of the enemy. And I understand the reasons why there are rules against that. And I'm not wanting to make that argument here or there of which is good, which is bad. What I am trying to make the argument is that cultural artifacts, even among bitter enemies, provides an avenue, provides a bridge for people to take those first steps to getting to know each other and to engaging with each other. I mean, the question is, how do you do it? I mean, how do you meet the person who's on the other side? How do you dialogue with the other? And I'm suggesting that cultural artifacts provide a way to do that. And so music, soccer, sports, business, trading, religion even, I'll talk about that later, and our pets all provided a way for, in the midst of a war and the brutality of a war, for people to be able to come together. And that's going to be the point of these episodes, Nudges and Bridges. Are there ways that we can find ways to nudge us to want to make the kind of decisions so that we can work with each other? Do those lead to bridges so that we can talk with each other, not necessarily changing each other's mind, but being able to find that we have more in common than what we might think? One of the issues when you have political and social debates is we can narrow our identity to just one thing. I am a, and then fill in the blank, a party affiliation or whatever, and you don't have anything else. But actually, we humans have a lot of else's. We have a lot of other things in our character and our interest, and I think that we can use those as a way to humanize the other side. And if we humanize the other side, we can find a way to talk to them as opposed to just caricaturize them, because caricaturization frequently leads to violence. And so that's what I'm going to be suggesting. This can happen in the workplace. It can happen outside of the workplace as well. And I want to give these little vignettes as ideas of the ways that we can use these cultural artifacts in order to bring ourselves together and have dialogue and have some degree of social harmony. With that, let me end our first episode. Thank you very much for being with me this particular episode. I look forward to seeing you in episode 2.